Returning to the family farm should have been a moment of comfort and nostalgia, a chance to reconnect with the land that had been passed down for 4 generations. Instead, the protagonist is met with a sight that feels like a cruel trick, where golden fields of wheat once stretched toward the horizon, now stands a towering, soulless hotel complex. The shock is immediate, visceral. The familiar dirt road leading home has been paved over, the white wooden fence surrounding the property replaced by gleaming steel barriers. Heavy construction equipment still lingers at the edges, as if mocking the memory of what once was. The farmhouse, the heart of the family's legacy, is gone, its absence leaving a gaping wound in the landscape. The protagonist's fingers tremble as they grip the steering wheel, their breath coming in short, uneven gasps. How could this have happened? How could the land that had been in their family for generations simply vanish, devoured by concrete and glass without a single warning? They park the car and step out, the ground beneath them feeling foreign, as if rejecting their presence. A flood of childhood memories rushes forward, the laughter of summers spent in the fields, the scent of freshly tilled earth, the sound of their grandfather's voice telling stories about the history of the farm. But now, all of it is gone, as if erased from existence. The farm had been more than just land. It was a living testament to perseverance, sacrifice, and love. It had survived economic downturns, brutal weather, and even legal disputes over the decades. The protagonist's great-grandfather had carved it from untamed wilderness, their grandfather had expanded it with unwavering dedication, and their parents had fought to keep it thriving. This farm had been a sanctuary, a place where hard work was rewarded, where tradition was honored, and where every harvest was a celebration of resilience. The realization that it had been stolen out from under them is not just infuriating, it's devastating. The protagonist clenches their fists, their mind racing through the possible explanations. Had their family somehow lost ownership without realizing it? Was there a forced sale, a loophole that allowed developers to claim the land? No, there had been no warning, no sign of trouble. If anything, their last conversation with their father had been about how well the farm was doing. But now, with nothing but a sprawling hotel in its place, it is clear that something deeply sinister is at play. They turn toward the massive structure, its polished windows reflecting the setting sun, and vow that whoever was responsible for this theft would answer for it. The name Karen Reynolds is whispered with a mixture of fear and disdain among homeowners in the community. As president of the local Homeowners Association, she had built a reputation for wielding power with an iron fist. What she lacked in warmth, she made up for in influence, using the HOA as a personal tool to enforce her vision of what the neighborhood should be. She had targeted the protagonist's family farm for years, treating it as an eyesore among the neatly arranged suburban properties that had slowly encroached upon the once rural land. She had sent notices about zoning violations that didn't exist, fined the family for supposed infractions, and even attempted to push new regulations that would make operating the farm more difficult. But this was beyond anything she had ever done before. The protagonist doesn't have to look far to find out who was behind the hotel project. A quick online search reveals her name on multiple legal documents connected to the development. She hadn't just played a role in the project, she had orchestrated it. Fury ignites within the protagonist, their hands shaking as they stare at the evidence on the screen. Karen had finally gotten what she wanted, but at what cost? And more importantly, how had she pulled this off without the family's knowledge? The protagonist knows one thing for certain: this isn't over. Determined to uncover the truth, the protagonist begins digging through every legal avenue they can find. They visit the county clerk's office, comb through property records, and speak with former neighbors who might have seen something suspicious. The pieces of the puzzle begin to take shape, revealing a network of corruption that extends far beyond just Karen Reynolds. There are signatures on documents that shouldn't exist, forged paperwork, and backroom deals that bypassed zoning laws. The more the protagonist uncovers, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a legal loophole, it was outright theft. And Karen had help. Developers, local officials, and even members of the zoning board had all played a part in ensuring that the farm was wiped from records, allowing the hotel project to proceed without opposition. But the most damning evidence comes from the protagonist's own family history. Digging through old files, they find property deeds dating back nearly a century, maps detailing the land's original boundaries, and letters from their grandfather detailing previous legal battles to protect the farm. These documents aren't just relics of the past, they are the key to exposing the fraud. With them, the protagonist can prove that the land was never legally sold, meaning the hotel's existence is built on a lie. Armed with evidence, the protagonist wastes no time in seeking justice. They hire a lawyer, Marcus, a sharp-witted attorney with a reputation for taking down corrupt institutions. Together, they begin building a case against Karen Reynolds and everyone involved in the land seizure. But the battle ahead is not an easy one. Developers have deep pockets, politicians have influence, and Karen is not one to go down without a fight. Almost immediately, the protagonist faces pushback, threatening letters, intimidation tactics, and even anonymous messages warning them to drop the case. But they refuse to be silenced. As word spreads, members of the community begin stepping forward, sharing their own experiences with HOA overreach and corruption. What started as a personal battle quickly turns into a movement. Local environmental groups take an interest when it's revealed that the hotel construction has violated multiple environmental laws, including the destruction of protected wetlands. Journalists begin covering the story, exposing Karen's history of shady dealings. The pressure mounts, and for the first time, the powerful forces behind the project begin to crack. The legal battle is only beginning, but for the first time since returning home, the protagonist feels a sense of hope. They will not let their family's legacy be erased without a fight. As the protagonist's fight against Karen Reynolds and the corrupt land grab gains momentum, something unexpected begins to happen. Their battle becomes a rallying cry for the entire town. People who had once remained silent out of fear or apathy start to come forward with their own grievances against the HOA and the developers. Some share stories of being harassed over minor infractions, while others reveal how they were pressured into selling their homes for far less than their value. The town's history is littered with examples of Karen's overreach, but until now, no one had dared to challenge her in a meaningful way. The protagonist finds unexpected allies in local business owners, environmental activists, and even former members of the HOA who had been pushed out when they disagreed with Karen's methods. Together, they organize meetings, raise funds for legal fees, and distribute pamphlets detailing the corruption behind the hotel project. Social media becomes a powerful tool, with community members sharing stories, old photos of the farm, and updates on the legal battle. The protagonist is no longer fighting alone. They are leading a movement that is growing stronger by the day. As the legal battle intensifies, the protagonist and their lawyer, Marcus, dig deeper into the environmental violations tied to the hotel's construction. What they discover is even worse than they had imagined. Not only did the developers destroy acres of farmland, but they also illegally built on protected wetlands that had been home to a variety of wildlife. With the help of an environmental scientist, they uncover evidence of soil contamination from improper waste disposal during construction. This isn't just a legal issue, it's an ecological disaster. Armed with this new information, they bring in state environmental agencies, forcing an official investigation into the hotel project. The developers try to downplay the damage, but the evidence is undeniable. Old photographs and records from the protagonist's grandfather show the land as it once was, a thriving ecosystem that played a vital role in the local environment. Now, it is a scarred landscape, its natural balance disrupted by corporate greed. News outlets pick up the story, framing it as not just a legal battle, but an environmental crisis that demands accountability. With mounting evidence and growing public outrage, Karen Reynolds is forced to face the one thing she has always avoided: accountability. The courtroom is packed with townspeople, reporters, and legal representatives from both sides. For years, Karen had ruled the HOA like a dictator, using fear and manipulation to maintain control. But today, she is just another defendant, stripped of her usual power. Marcus presents the case methodically, laying out the illegal land seizure, the forged documents, and the environmental violations. Witnesses testify: former HOA board members, environmental experts, and longtime residents who had suffered under Karen's rule. The prosecution paints a damning picture of greed, corruption, and manipulation. Karen, once confident and defiant, begins to crack under the pressure. She stumbles over her responses, contradicts herself, and tries to shift blame onto the developers and local officials. But the evidence is overwhelming. The protagonist watches as the woman who stole their family's land is finally held accountable, her empire of deceit crumbling before their eyes. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, Judge Hartman delivers the verdict. In a landmark ruling, the court declares that the land seizure was illegal, the documents used to justify the project were fraudulent, and the environmental damage caused by the construction must be addressed. The hotel project is halted immediately, with developers ordered to pay massive fines for their violations. But the most satisfying moment comes when Karen Reynolds is personally held responsible. She is stripped of her position as HOA president, fined heavily for her role in the corruption, and faces potential criminal charges for her fraudulent dealings. As the judge delivers the final ruling, the protagonist feels a wave of emotions: relief, triumph, and the weight of their family's legacy finally being honored. The farm may not be the same as it once was, but justice has been served, and that is a victory worth celebrating. With the legal battle won, the protagonist turns their focus to what comes next: restoring what was lost. The hotel, now an abandoned shell of corporate greed, is slated for demolition. Environmental groups work alongside the community to begin the long process of healing the land. The soil is tested, contaminated areas are treated, and plans are made to reintroduce native plants and wildlife. Though the farm itself cannot be fully restored to its former state, its spirit remains intact. The protagonist plants the first crops in a small patch of land that was left untouched, a symbolic act of resilience and renewal. Neighbors volunteer their time to help rebuild what they can, and the town that once stood divided by HOA politics is now united in a shared goal: to protect their homes, their land, and each other. Though Karen Reynolds hints at an appeal, her power has been broken. The protagonist knows the fight isn't over, but for now, they take a moment to stand on the land their family fought so hard to keep, feeling the wind rustle through the remaining fields. The battle was won, but the true victory is in knowing that this place, this legacy, will never be forgotten. Though the judge's ruling had delivered a decisive blow to Karen Reynolds and the corrupt developers, the fallout from the case continues to ripple through the town. Investigations widen as state and federal agencies begin scrutinizing not only the HOA but also the local government officials who had enabled the illegal land seizure. Whispers of bribery, backdoor deals, and years of unchecked power flood the news cycle, exposing a much larger web of corruption than anyone had initially suspected. Several resignations follow, including key figures in the zoning board and county government, all of whom had profited from the unlawful development. The town, once under Karen's thumb, now finds itself at a crossroads. Without the oppressive control of the HOA's corrupt leadership, residents begin discussing long-overdue reforms, ways to ensure that power never falls into the wrong hands again. The protagonist, though relieved at the destruction of the old system, knows that true change will take time. They watch as the town grapples with its own rebirth, wondering what role they will play in its fight as the dust settles. The protagonist finally has time to sift through the documents, maps, and letters left behind by their grandfather. It was his meticulous record-keeping, his unwavering belief in the value of the farm, that had made the legal victory possible. Sitting in the quiet of their small temporary home, the protagonist rereads the letters, words written decades ago but carrying weight even now. In them, their grandfather had warned of encroaching development, of powerful people who would see the land as nothing more than a commodity. He had fought similar battles in his time, always determined to protect what was his. And now, his grandchild had done the same. The farm itself may never be what it once was, but its spirit endures. The protagonist makes a silent vow to honor that legacy, whether through rebuilding a piece of it or ensuring that others never face the same injustice. The past had spoken through the pages of those old documents, and the protagonist had listened. With Karen Reynolds disgraced and the hotel project abandoned, the community begins to reclaim the land in more ways than one. What was once a battleground of greed and corruption now becomes a place of unity and resilience. Local environmental groups, once seen as outsiders, are welcomed as partners in restoring the damaged ecosystem. Schools organize field trips to plant trees, farmers offer expertise on soil restoration, and volunteers from all walks of life come together to undo the damage inflicted by unchecked development. The protagonist, once focused solely on their own loss, now sees a larger purpose unfolding before them. Their fight had not just been for the farm, it had been for everyone who had ever been steamrolled by powerful organizations. The town begins to change, not just physically, but in spirit. People who had once feared the HOA now speak out against injustices they once tolerated. The farm, or what remains of it, has become more than just land. It is a testament to what happens when a community stands together. Despite her downfall, Karen Reynolds refuses to disappear quietly. Even as her name becomes synonymous with corruption, she fights to hold on to the last shreds of her influence. She files an appeal, claiming that the court's ruling was based on flawed evidence and procedural errors. Though most dismiss her as a desperate woman grasping at straws, the protagonist knows better than to underestimate her. Karen had spent years manipulating the system to her advantage, and her connections, though weakened, still exist. The developers backing the hotel project may have abandoned her publicly, but in private, some of them still have interests in keeping the appeal alive. The protagonist and Marcus prepare for another fight, one that may not have the same public spectacle as the first but is no less important. The battle for justice is rarely won in a single victory, and Karen's appeal is a reminder that corruption, like a weed, has deep roots. But this time, the protagonist is ready. Standing at the edge of what remains of the family farm, the protagonist takes a deep breath, letting the wind carry the scent of fresh soil and the promise of renewal. The fight is far from over, but for the first time in months, they feel something resembling peace. They look out at the land, not as a place of loss, but as a foundation for the future. Whether they choose to rebuild the farm, turn it into a protected natural space, or use it as a place to educate others on the dangers of unchecked power, they know one thing for certain: the farm will never be forgotten. It had stood for 4 generations, not just as a piece of property, but as a symbol of resilience. Now, in a new era, it will stand for something even greater: the power of resistance, the strength of a united community, and the undeniable truth that no amount of money or influence can erase what truly matters. Even with Karen Reynolds stripped of her authority and the hotel project officially dead, the protagonist knows that true victory isn't just about winning one battle. It's about ensuring that the same forces of greed and corruption don't return. Karen's appeal still looms, a last-ditch effort to claw her way back into relevance. Though her reputation is in shambles, there are still those in power willing to back her if it means salvaging their own interests. The protagonist, alongside Marcus and their growing network of allies, remains vigilant. They know how easily corruption can slip back into the cracks of a town eager to move on. Every piece of legislation, every new development proposal, every shift in leadership must be watched carefully. It is exhausting, but necessary. The battle for the farm had been deeply personal, but the war for the soul of the town is just beginning. The case had changed everything. It was no longer just about one stolen farm or one corrupt HOA president. The fight had awakened something in the town, a realization that they had allowed power to go unchecked for too long. Town hall meetings, once sparsely attended and dominated by HOA rhetoric, are now packed with engaged citizens demanding accountability. Community members who had been too afraid to speak out now share their own stories of harassment and manipulation. The town that once allowed Karen Reynolds to rule without question is now a place where every decision is challenged, every abuse of power is called out. Even as Karen and her allies attempt to push forward their appeal, they find themselves facing a town that no longer fears them. The protagonist watches with a quiet sense of pride, knowing that no matter what happens next, the town will never be the same. The damage done to the farm is more than just legal or financial. It is physical, etched into the very soil that had once been the heartbeat of their family's legacy. Though much of the land is still scarred from construction, efforts to restore it are underway. With the help of environmental groups, soil experts, and volunteers, the protagonist begins the long process of bringing life back to what was lost. The contaminated areas are carefully treated, invasive materials removed, and native plants reintroduced to restore balance. The process is slow, painstakingly so, but with each new sprout of green, each returning bird call, the land begins to whisper of hope. Though the farm will never fully return to the way it was, it can become something new, something just as meaningful. The protagonist no longer sees the land as a place of tragedy, but as a place of transformation. Karen's appeal finally reaches the courtroom, but this time, the town is watching. Every move she makes is scrutinized, every argument dissected by a public that no longer buys into her carefully constructed persona. The evidence against her is overwhelming, too much for even her most well-connected allies to dismiss. When the final ruling is delivered, it is clear and absolute: her appeal is denied. There will be no second chance, no loophole to exploit. Karen's reign is officially over. As she exits the courtroom, she no longer carries the smug confidence she once wielded. Instead, she is a shadow of the woman who had once ruled the town with an iron grip. The protagonist watches her go, feeling neither pity nor triumph, only relief. The battle that had consumed so much of their life is finally, truly over. Standing at the edge of the land that had once been their family's pride, the protagonist allows themselves to breathe. The farm, though changed, still stands. The town, once afraid, now thrives. And Karen Reynolds, once untouchable, is nothing more than a cautionary tale. The protagonist thinks of their grandfather, of the generations before them who had worked this land with their bare hands. They think of the documents, the letters, the stories that had guided them through this fight. Legacy is not just about land, it is about the values passed down through time, the lessons learned, the battles fought. This place, no matter what becomes of it, will always be a symbol of resilience, proof that some things are worth fighting for. The protagonist turns toward the future, knowing that whatever comes next, the farm will always be a part of them.